Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm starting a new quilt along. Yay! If you are in my scrap club, you'll have known this is coming. If you aren't, you might have seen the little notice I put up on Instagram yesterday, but probably not. So this is a surprise. So if you're new to the channel, I do scrappy quilt alongs once or twice a year. The videos are all on YouTube, but the patterns are inside my scrap club on Patreon. I'm really excited about this one. It's called the Shattered Scraps Quilt Along, and I think it's going to be really fun. I'll show you what the quilt itself is all about in a minute, but if you're new to the channel and you haven't done a Scrap Fabric Love quilt along yet, there's a few things you probably need to know. So my quilt alongs are about a couple things. One, it's about using up what you have. So whether that's your scraps, your stash, whatever it is that you have already in your sewing room, you're not supposed to buy new fabric for my quilt alongs. Unless, little tiny caveat, total beginners who have no fabric, you're allowed. Anybody else? No, go stash diving. Okay? And if you're nervous about that, I'm going to show you why it's going to work when I show you all of the cool options for this quilt. Two, I like to encourage people to make patterns their own, to change up the colors, to choose the way you want to do it. So just like most of my quilt alongs, this quilt along's got two methods you can make it with. The main method that I'm going to be showing and using myself is foundation paper piecing. Don't get scared, it's not that hard. I'll show you next week when we do the block construction. Second version, I'm not going to make a whole quilt this way, but I will show you an improv version to make this block also next week. Because my two loves in quilting are FPP for precision and improv for just going at it. So whichever camp you fall in, you can follow along. But as well as choosing the way you want to make the quilt, my goal for this quilt along is that every single one of our quilts is going to look different. So we're all going to be making the same quilt, the same block, and it's really just one block with some variations. One block though, but the colors we choose, the scraps we use, it's gonna look completely different. And I'm gonna show you far too many options for how you could mix up the colors and use what you have in your stash, in your scrap bins without buying anything new. Thirdly, and most importantly, absolutely no stressing in my quilt alongs. We can fix anything that comes up for you, okay? We have got an extra session inside Scrap Club for the quilt along, like a Q&A, troubleshooting, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be the same week that the block tutorial comes out. You just hop on there, ask me whatever you need, and we will help anyone who is struggling. But this is not a difficult block. Even if you're new to foundation paper piecing, I think you can do this one, and I'll show you in the tutorial. The two block tutorials are going to be next week, and hopefully that will calm any fears anybody has. So what are we making? That's the most important bit, right? So as I said, this quilt is made up of one repeating block, but that block is made up of 4 quarters that are slightly different to each other, and you can mix and match them. It'll all become clearer again when we do the tutorials next week. But these are 2 examples of the blocks. So this one, 3 of the quarters are white and 1 of them is yellow. That has to do with the sort of plan I have for this version of the quilt that I'm going to make. This one, background's totally scrappy, but all purples, right? This was a test block. I'm not going to use this in my quilt, but I'll explain why I was testing with purple in a minute. Anyway, so what you need is an accent fabric and scraps, but you don't need to have a whole quilt full of, for example, purple scraps if you don't have that. So I'll explain more about the mixing and matching of the different patterns for the quarters next week, because I think that fits better with when we're putting the block together. But I want to explain about the color choices and the scraps and all the different options you can use and the sizes you can make. So let me show you some mock-ups. I love mock-ups. So there are 5 size options in the PDF that you get inside Scrap Club. This visual here is for the 16 block throw size, and I've just added a border for the purposes of the mock-up. We'll talk borders in week 3. You can see here I've kind of grouped a whole bunch of teal scraps with a white accent. And then here's the same size with a whole bunch of different pinks and that same white accent. Here's how different it looks if you take that same size, you make the accent black, and you just go totally random with the scraps in the background. If you like a little bit of random, a little bit of control, here is a kind of more limited palette of colors as a scrappy background, but not one that needs to be planned or thought out too much. And if you're a minimalist, here is the baby quilt with the border option with all low volumes and just one pop of an accent color. One of the ideas that excites me with this quilt is that you could start with a grouping of scraps in one color, and when you run out, just move on to the next. So this is what it would look like if you didn't strictly stick to specific colors and specific blocks and you let them kind of run into each other. And the idea of this came from a request from my mother-in-law to make a quilt for her with sort of gradients of a particular color. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, this is obviously a rainbow version. And this is the larger throw with 20 blocks. And here's that same kind of rainbow idea with the black accent in the smaller throw. And then this is more of like a linear version of the rainbow. So you're just doing like a row each of one color, which could maybe be easier to keep track of. Then, of course, I couldn't stop playing. And I was like, well, we could make squares. And you could start with one color scrap in the middle and then grow it bigger and just keep using different colors as you go further out on the quilt. Here's a similar idea in the small table topper size in Christmas colors. And another version of the table topper where we played with some of the internal shapes in the blocks to make a kind of secondary pattern in the middle. Here is an idea in the baby quilt size where maybe you just use up all the scraps in one color per block and tie it all together with the accent in the middle. And I showed you this one already, but what if we just added a little pop of some color around that, and all of a sudden you've got a totally different look. All of these repeating diamonds are just too structured for you. Why don't you go totally modern? So pick one shade for your background, find all those scraps, and then pick some contrasting scraps and add one per quarter block for just a little pop of something. So the only problem with doing these mock-ups of all of the options when I do these quilt alongs is I can never pick just one. So I'm going to make two versions of this quilt, but I'm doing them both FPP this time because that's my preferred method for this quilt. So the first one is going to be for my mother-in-law, and it's all in purples. So this is the general mock-up of the option I'm using. I'm not going to use solids like it looks like here. I'm going to use mixes of purples for each of these shades, but I'll show you in a minute because I'm going to do the fabric pool for this one on the camera. My mother-in-law has requested several specific shades of purple in a gradation and a quilt. So that's kind of how the idea for this whole thing came about. Anyway, so that's one. And then when I was doing all the options, I couldn't help mocking up a rainbow version. And so obviously I have to make that too. So that is what this is about. This was a test for the purple, but this one isn't quite going to work for her quilt because I haven't got the shades all properly together. I don't think. Maybe. I don't know. I'll see. I don't think this one's going in her quilt, but this one is going in the rainbow one. So let me show you how I'm pulling my fabric. Okay. So for the quilt for my mother-in-law, she said she wanted something, but she didn't really know what. So I just gave her literally a random bunch of quilting magazines to take away with her. And then she returned them to me with these little sticky notes where she liked something, right? And so the common denominator that I could see in the ones she liked was that the blocks were repeating. So there wasn't really anything where it was like a bunch of where it was, so this is like all triangles, for example. There wasn't anything where there was like a bunch of different blocks or like row quilts where different rows were different blocks. So I didn't want to follow any of these patterns. It was just to get an idea of the style, and they're all relatively modernish looking as well. So anyway, that was the style-ish. And then she gave me a note that said she wanted purple. And she wanted the color to kind of go down in a bit of a gradation from purple to mauve to lavender to heather. And then she had a specific size as well, which is, it's for a double bed, but it's not exactly the size you would normally make a double quilt. It's a little bit smaller because she doesn't want the overhang. So anyway, that's the rough outline that I've got. So I found a little color code so that I know what purple, mauve, lavender, and heather look like. And that is what I need to do for my fabric pool, is sort of bunch my fabrics into the purple, the mauve, the lavender, and the heather. And then I can use those to go down in my quilt. Now, all I'm gonna do is roughly group what I've already got. I'm not gonna try and calculate whether it's enough. If it's not enough, I can kind of change the gradation. There can be less of one and more of another or whatever, because that's I need to add a bit of me in it, and that's me, is that I'm just going to use what I've got. I have collected a few scrappy bits and pieces from other places. So this is kind of what I've been collecting that I thought would go with it. But I've got my whole other purple fabric basket, which I'm also going to go through. This, I think, is going to be the accent fabric. It's the leftover white from my collaboration quilt with Tom. I think it would be enough. If it's not, I'll deal, right? It looks like a lot. I'm going to set that to the side. That's my accent fabric. Then I've got these, but let me just get my purple basket because this is not enough, obviously. Those are just empty boxes. This is my purple basket. This is literally this plus what's in the box is all of my purple fabric plus my box of crumbs. Okay, so that's what I've got.
So for the purposes of my specific quilt, I've made up this color card for myself to keep me right.
I am going to dump this out, and I'm going to put purple in one, mauve in one, lavender in one, heather in one, and then everything I'm not using back in the purple basket to go back on the shelf. Some of the fabrics that I pull are going to be big. They're going to be stash. And some will be littler bits, you know, whatever, little scrappy bits that I have. That's fine. So you can use either one, whatever you feel like using up. For reference, if you're pulling your own fabric, the patch sizes in the pattern are roughly, the biggest ones are maybe a tiny bit bigger than my hand. A lot of them would be more like 3/4 of a hand. There are obviously measurements inside and templates inside the PDF, but just for a visual guide, we're not talking about great big huge pieces. And for the accent fabric, you're looking for 4-inch squares, okay?
So I dumped all the purple out on the floor and got my little basket situation set up. And then I just kept looking at that little color card on my phone and holding up the bits of fabric against it. I know it's an image on a phone, whatever, but I needed something as a guide because I'm not super familiar with all the shades of purple. So anyway, I was just roughly grouping them. I don't have to use all of this fabric, and I could decide that one of them doesn't quite go with that shade later on. This is just a rough pull. So I'm definitely not going to use all of this fabric in my mother-in-law's quilt. But it gives me a look at what I've got. And if you're doing something similar, you'll probably find you have way more than you think. And even if you just start pulling stuff that you think might be the right size for this pattern or that you just want to use up, it might give you a kind of a brainwave about what to do in terms of color grouping for the quilt.
So there's my initial kind of fabric pull. Some of the mauves look different to each other. Some of the lavenders look, now I'm thinking maybe that's heather and not lavender when I'm looking at it. So I might move some things around. I'm not suggesting that you pick a color and do this kind of thing. This is a specific request, but you could do a similar thing with, say, blue, green, teal, pink, I don't know, whatever colors you like. Do you know what I mean? You could be just bundling what you have and using that as the basis for your kind of color layout. Just see what scraps you've got, see what, leftover charm pack squares you have, see what you've got and have a play. That's what this is all about.
Now, the way I'm pulling my fabric for this rainbow version looks a little bit different.
There is no set person this is for. I don't have to do anything with it, right? But I like the idea of it because so this is all I've pulled so far. I have lots of random white leftovers. So, because I do low volume scrappy backgrounds a lot, so I have a lot. I've got a few of these. I've got more white fabric. This isn't all my white fabric. I'll probably use more. But I've kind of started with this because ideally I want to use this up. Now, some of these pieces are not going to be big enough for the patch sizes. However, I'm willing to put in a little work and piece, I could be piecing bits and pieces of these together and then cutting the pieces out of that and making it even scrappier. So I'll show you an example of that on the one block. Hang on. So here's that one block that I've done for the rainbow one. And these are all the patch sizes that are in the pattern. But this one, this is the patch. It's here. It's this A2. But I used a partially pieced crumb block and I just cut it to the template size because I already had it pieced. So, so I might decide, because my goal with this one is to use up some of these bits, to just piece this into some larger pieces that I can then cut the pieces out of. So that's just me. I don't mind doing extra piecing in order to piece. So depending on what your goal is, what you want to use up, that's an option too. Okay, but so all I'm doing though is I've pulled a bit of white. I know I'm starting with the yellow, right? So the rainbow one, there's kind of like 3 of these quarter yellow blocks, and then I move on to another color kind of thing. So I pulled a few yellow bits here. I've got, these are also my white. I've got 2 white crumb boxes. They might not all make it into this because these are smaller, but anyway. And then I've got my yellow crumb box. So I might be able to get some bits in here that would fit, but the patch sizes are bigger than crumbs. Okay. However, so all I've done is sort of start pulling a few little bits of the yellow, and then my accent fabric for the whole quilt's pink. So I've pulled a couple, but for this one, I'm just going to be pulling as I go. I'm kind of going to look at my coloring page, look at how many blocks I need of whatever color, and pull out. So the yellow scraps when I'm doing the yellow, then put them away, then pull out the green scraps when I'm doing the green, and kind of do it that way. And if I end up not having enough, which it's not going to happen because I know I have lots of everything. But if it did happen, I could just wait until I had the leftovers or the fabric for that color. But I know I'll have plenty. Even if I end up cutting into a bit of white yardage and adding it to this, I will have plenty to make the rainbow quilt. But I'm not pulling for the whole quilt. That's not what I do normally. So the only reason I was pulling all of those scraps for the purple one is because of the gradation thing. Otherwise, I would just probably pull block by block by block and just use my little coloring page as a guide for what I'm pulling next. That's just what works for me. But obviously other folk like to know they have everything ahead of time, and that's why you have the pattern. If you are in Scrap Club, you already have the PDF that you can download inside Scrap Club. Unlike years previous where I've sent out like a different PDF each week with the step we're doing each week, this time I've made it just one document because I know last time there were folk who wanted to kind of rush ahead. So if that's you, have at it. The only thing I would say is that I will be saying some stuff that might be useful next week. So you might want to wait until next week before you start cutting things and piecing, but that's up to you. If you're confident, go for it. So in the PDF, you're going to find everything you need. How many blocks you need to make what size of quilt, your FPP patterns to print. There are templates for the FPP. There's the improv piecing instructions. And I'm really excited about these. Let me just pull them out here. Coloring pages for all the different sizes. So you can sort of play around and color in. And this is good for keeping track as well. If you see one of the color options that I gave you that you like, and you want to sort of color and see how many blocks do I need with certain color scraps and things like that, you can use the coloring page to keep track. I am going to put all of the mock-ups that I used in today's video in a little post inside Scrap Club as well. So if you want to refer to those, if you do want to use any of the color options that I showed you, you'll have the visual for that, and you can sort of transfer it into your coloring page according to the scraps that you have. The only thing that is not in here, that is never in my quilt alongs, is the total fabric requirements for the entire quilt, because that means you're going to go out and buy yardage. So we're not doing that. I have given you the cutting requirements, fabric requirements for one block. I've told you how many blocks. You want to do the math, you want to go buy yardage, you can do it. But I like the idea of pulling as you go. I know that's not how everybody works, but I think it does encourage some problem solving, some creativity, just flexes some different quilting muscles. So if you've never made a quilt that way, maybe give it a go. I know you can sometimes get some messages in quilting that you need to, for example, have all the same background fabric from exactly the same fabric line had to have been cut at the same time in the same shop, or it's going to be a slightly different shade. All of this stuff, we don't worry about that here. So I do, as you can see, like to color group my scraps, but white is any white, purple is any purple kind of thing. And you might be surprised how cohesive that can all look when you just let it be different fabrics in the same family. You don't have to color group, that's not a thing. But if you let yourself go, I can just use any white I have, for example, if you're looking for white, then it allows you to kind of dive into your stash, use things that maybe you hadn't considered using because you thought it was too small or whatever, and just get some of that cycling out and maybe make some space in your sewing cupboards or baskets or whatever you use to store your fabric.
So this is the Quilt Along schedule. This is week 1, the intro and the fabric pull, and we'll move along from there. And the last video will be on the 16th of September. But there's an extra edition this year that I haven't done before that's going to happen on the 23rd of September.
Something new I'm doing for this year's Quilt Along is prizes. Never done these before for a Quilt Along. I know other Quilt Alongs are sponsored by big sewing brands and you can win fat quarter bundles and all that kind of stuff. We don't roll like that here so much. So what we're doing is, if any of you, if you're new to the channel, it's not going to make sense. But if you've watched before, I often do sort of fabric hauls from like eBay or Vinted or places like that. I like to sort of scavenge and buy other people's leftover stuff, right? And so I'll open a box and it'll have fabric and notions and whatever. And some of it's cool and some of it's a bit, So what I've done is created my surprise box for one lucky winner. No questionable stuff in here, hopefully. It's all kind of fabric I've chosen, a few larger bits, few fat quarters, strips, scraps, and some notions and bits and pieces that I've just pulled together to put in here. So this box, I'm not going to show you because it's a surprise. If you've seen those videos, I don't know what's in it either. Even when I bought it on eBay, usually the listing photos are terrible. So you don't know what's inside. So you don't get to see this. But inside there is, what is there? There's some William Morris. There's a little bit of Ruby Star. There's some Michael Miller, I think. There's some of my favorite Helen Steele little scraps that I buy at Festival of Quilts every year. And there was another name of a fabric designer that people would know that I was going to say it. I can't remember it, but it's in there. And also just some other little cute sewing notions, tools, bits and pieces, things like that. And stickers. So I've got stickers now, if you didn't know. So I've got one that says Scrap Club. That's the one here. Confident Beginner. And, ooh, that's upside down. I didn't really measure, but it'll be fine. And this one was prompted by a subscriber who told me it had to go in a tote bag, which I've done as well, but this is a sticker now. Anywho, you can get the stickers on Etsy, these two. Anyway, Scrap Club one, you can only get in Scrap Club. And the whole thing comes in a lovely magnetic little storage box that you can then have on your shelves and keep your sewing space a little bit neat. So that is prize 1. Then there's 2 other prizes, just 2 smaller sort of fabric scrap boxes. So they will have the stickers and some other little scraps and bits and pieces that I can fit in this smaller box. So there's 2 of these, 1 of these. You can only win the prizes if you're in Scrap Club. And in order to enter, all you have to do is either share a picture of your progress in the Quilt Along inside the Scrap Club chats, or on Instagram by tagging me at Scrap Fabric Love. But it's only going to be Scrap Club members who are eligible to win the prizes. And you don't have to finish the quilt to win. You just have to share a photo. So even if you're in progress, I'm going to draw the winner on the 23rd of September, which is after the Quilt Along videos will all be finished, and I will have finished my quilt by then. But you don't have to have finished yours to be in with a chance to win these. Hope you're as excited for this Quilt Along as I am. If you want to join in, please head to the link in the description and join Scrap Club. You can join for just 1 month, download the stuff, come to the Q&A. If you don't want to stick around with us, that's totally fine. But hopefully, once you're inside, you'll love all the beautiful non-judgy quilters who are in there. And you might want to stick around and be part of our little scrappy community in there. Next week, as I said, 2 block tutorials, 1 foundation paper piece, 1 improv. Feel free to ask me any questions you have in the comments. If you're new to the channel, you've never watched before, I make scrap quilts. I don't follow a lot of quilting rules. And I would love to see you join me next time for those block tutorials. So thanks so much for spending time with me, and I hope to see you soon.